Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the latest in our series of fireside chats. And I'm delighted to be, well, not joined by, but joined on screen by the Revd Dr Fran Grimes, who is the parish priest at Korumburra and Poowong in South Gippsland, beautiful South Gippsland. Welcome, Fran.
Thank you. Good to be here at
Thanks
home.
for being, at home, that's right. Thanks for being willing to have a chat on Zoom, and thank you also for your sermon, which we've slotted into our live and pre-recorded Eucharist for Sunday's worship from St Paul's Cathedral in Sale. Thank you for your ministry to us in that capacity also. And I'll circle back to that in a minute, Fran, but just for those who don't know the beautiful part of the world where you minister and live, tell us a little bit about the context of your parish.
Well, placed within beautiful South Gippsland, Korumburra is the, I think, very hilly bit.
Yes.
Very hilly with a beautiful church building and history leading into it. It was once a larger parish, and now Korumburra is the main part of that Korumburra parish, and in recent years also incorporated with the Poowong parish, which was also its own parish in time. Yes. We just recently celebrated 50 years of the newer building at Poowong, and so we incorporate Poowong, Loch and Nyora in that area. And you just have to say green hills. It's just beautiful, the whole area. As I drive from Korumburra to Poowong on a Sunday morning, it's always very beautiful there. And it's Korumburra itself is becoming a real hub for South Gippsland and for great cafes, breweries. Borough Foods is its main industry, and that has really thrived in this time, and seen a big part of milk production coming from Borough Foods in Korumburra. So
yeah, right.
It's doing very well with the dairy industry. Yeah,
lots of beautiful dairy farms around those hills. Yeah,
yep. And beef cattle there, and and a lot of people branching out into all sorts of different types of farming too, smaller scale, and a lot into organic gardening and things like that too. So.
Isn't that lovely? It's almost like a return to, to sort of cottage industries, or that smaller scale of farming, of days of yore. We hear a lot about the aggregation of farms these days, for economies of scale and so forth. But it's lovely to think that there's still a place for those smaller, more kind of niche, little farming industries to thrive.
Yes.
In our kind of economy, which is great. Yeah. And as part of that, Fran, your parish has put in an application with Anglicare Victoria through our Parish Partnerships program for a grant to construct a community garden next door to the church there. So tell us a little bit about that process and what the vision is for the project.
Yes, well, that's up at Poowong behind the All Saints Church on the sunny side. It used to be the place where the church hall was, but a large tree fell on that a number of years ago. And so we were left with this beautiful, just green, grassy, north-facing part of the church. And
it's the bit that overlooks the footy oval, isn't it?
Bit that overlooks the footy oval, so it's very, very central to the town. And I was at a Poowong community meeting and looking at ways to strengthen the community, because it's not a large, a great place for meeting people in the streets of Poowong, and a lot of new people are moving in. And from that meeting, one of the young people in town, a 16-year-old, said, what about a community garden? And then one of the very sort of pillars of the town said to me, Fran, your space behind your church would be perfect for that. And I just sparked up at the opportunity, and I thought, we've been praying for a way to use that area to reach out to the community. And so this has been started, and we turned the first sod on All Saints Day for All Saints.
Oh, is that right?
We had
just a week ago. That's fantastic.
We had Danny O'Brien, our Member of Parliament state member, come.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah, it was his first, function since March. And he said, Fran, is this a religious gathering? I said, yes, it is. So
quick stay, prayer.
We were good. We sure did, and we did lots of blessing on the day. And we're now at the stage now starting to design and build the garden beds.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah, I can't wait to see how that evolves. And tell us a little bit about the process of applying, because I think this project is sort of right in the wheelhouse of those parish partnership grants, because they're really about trying to help parishes find, fresh ways of connecting with the wider community. And one of the lovely things about your application was that there were so many, members of the wider community who were clearly kind of invested and engaged with the idea.
Mm. Yes, I was. The idea was sort of born, I suppose, and then I saw Catherine Muston at a rural deanery meeting just before lockdown back in March, and she was very encouraging about the whole idea. And so we applied for the grant, and it brought together all our ideas and all our supporters. We have Landcare, the Garden Club, the Historical Society, the Lions. We're all people that really love and care for the Poowong community. So we were able to get alongside those and put this idea forward. And the process was very straightforward. Catherine was really helpful in how we applied for the grant, and getting the budgeting together all came through. And they were so good about notifying us when we were successful with the grant too. So, and that's given us an enormous boost when I was able to tell people in Poowong and in our parish that actually a few people were concerned, what are we doing something like this now for? Because it's such an odd time. But we said, no, look, it's all been done with grants that Anglicare have given us. And so, we just thank God for it. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, it's wonderful. Yeah. No, that's great, and a great encouragement to others, I think, to have a go at, thinking of a project like that and being in the application process. So yeah, good on you.
Yeah.
Just on that, Fran, getting back to your sermon, you alluded to this, that there's a sense of almost sort of paralysis, isn't there, in a period like we've been through. Why would we do a project like this now? Because we're all kind of stuck in the middle of the COVID fog, and yet to have something that begins to lead us out of that, something to gather around, a vision, a project is a great fillip to people, isn't it? So, and I think in your homily you touch on this a little bit for the community that Matthew was writing for, that they were filled with expectation about the kingdom of heaven and the return of Christ, and yet they had to kind of recalibrate and understand that no, whilst that's a real hope, it's not going to be realised necessarily in their own generation, and to begin to learn to live as if the kingdom of heaven were the real politic in their day. And so there's a number of these, what I would call the harder, parables in Matthew, where there's a bit of a sting in the tail in some of these, including this one, where the church is kind of just doing that adjusting of its horizons a little bit to interpret Jesus' message into its own, context. So I wonder if you think there are some parallels for us, or some things that kind of apply in our moment, that a moment like we've been in this year, where we've had to kind of rethink our timeframes and rethink what really matters, what our core business is, what is it that we're supposed to be doing with the gifts that we've been given. Do you have a sense that there's a bit of an echo of a parable like that for the church in our day, Fran?
Very much so. And I've sort of, as I've spoken to people throughout the pandemic, I've said, in a way, it's not that different for us as Christians, because we're always saying, Lord, how do you want us to live in this moment? And this has been a very different sort of a moment, but it also has meant that we're listening a bit more. We really want to know, well, how can we go ahead? How can we move here? What would please you for us to do during this time? And so I've very much seen that that's where we are with this. It's actually alerted us to the fact that we have all our patterns and our traditions and all the rest of them. And what happens when all those go? It's God that we're following. It's him we want to please above all. And I think that parable brings that out with the first two. They just wanted to please their master, whatever it was. Whereas the third one didn't sort of trust or know or want to go where the master was. He wanted to have something a little bit more certain and traditional, I suppose.
And there's nothing speaks more to the status quo than taking your talent and burying it in the ground and then digging it up again. I mean, there's not much room for progression or evolution there, is there?
No, that's right. It's a very sad story of how he chose to live that life.
And you pick up nicely on this idea of the kind of tension between trust and fear, or love and fear, that runs through the parable, and perhaps that third that third servant feared the gift, feared the giftedness almost. Like, what do I do with this?
Mm.
Do you think we can sometimes be afraid of the things that God entrusts us with to use in ministry?
Yes, yeah, I think we can. I think when we get when we get a bit stuck, I suppose, in whatever our usual ways of doing things are, venturing from those can be a little bit scary. In the sense of, how do we worship outdoor? You know, we had to open our side door at Currumbara, and there was the communion table, and everyone, 10 people could sit around.
Yeah.
It actually caused us to think, how do we do this? And we were able to, you know, with God's help, do things differently. But when we first had to think about it, we thought, well, you know, this is South Gippsland. How can we possibly do things outdoors?
Yeah, that's right. So, you've seen the weather here.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. And even, and again, you use a nice image about carrying heavy bags, which really concretizes the notion of a talent for us. And sometimes perhaps we fear even the weight or the responsibility of what we're entrusted with. And, you know, that lovely comforting image that you draw out, that Jesus really only asks us to carry what he knows we can carry.
Yeah.
And again, so it comes back to our willingness to trust the Master with what we've been given.
Yes.
Oh, that's great stuff.
So it sort of grew as it does when you're writing a sermon. It became more about the reason that the third servant acted like he did than what he actually did. It was the reason behind it.
Yeah. So, do you find that, just in terms of your own process, that sometimes when you start out, you know, to think about a sermon or to write it, to make some notes, you're not 100% sure where you're going to end up with it? You might have a bit of a plan, but actually the process of writing and praying through it leads you somewhere where you didn't necessarily know you were going to end up?
Definitely. And I just thank God for that, because it's often then comes back and addresses something I'm actually going through. It's not, oh, well, everyone needs to know this. It's actually, this is something you need to know, Fran. And I learn every time I write a sermon something more about where God is leading me. So definitely.
Isn't that wonderful? Yeah, I think there's a truism that we preach first to ourselves, you know, not in an indulgent way, hopefully, but because we really need to live it, don't we? It needs to be embodied in us in order to offer it to other people. So yeah, it's just helpful to hear a little bit about the process. And Fran, your journey to ordained ministry has been a really interesting one, because you started off being a medical practitioner and journeyed from that medical career into ordained ministry. I've got a particular interest in that journey, having just dabbled in a medical degree. I never had a medical career, but I did a few years of medicine and found myself also kind of pulled towards ordained ministry. But tell us a little bit about that. Did you see that as a single vocation that was expressed variously over time, or was it a real kind of shift in vocation for you at some point?
I think it was a single vocation, probably. I entered university having had a very strong Catholic background, and came into a university student groups and just embraced everything they were talking about, a really living relationship with Jesus. And so more of my university time was spent running Christian groups and being involved in going on missionary trips. And so all the way through, I was very much, you know, Lord, what would you have me do with all this? And so going into hospitals, coming out into general practice. I went to missionary training college actually very early on in my down in Tasmania, and my husband was there, and we were set to go to missionary work, and decided actually it was more important to come back to the western suburbs in Melbourne to you know, bring health and wholeness into that place. So it's always been very much part of that, and there's always been quite a little bit of a frustration for me that the health and the wholeness that I long for people isn't something that I can freely share within a medical context. If they ask, I do, and if they don't ask, then I don't.
Sure.
So I've always felt that need to go further and to really talk about true salvation and about you know, God's help in our lives and things too. So South Gippsland, when I came down here to work at Foster, I found the medical part a little bit terrifying. Because, emergency work in a casualty, you'll see your friends coming in who aren't well, and I kind of thought some days this is like a war zone because I'm seeing friends who aren't well, and it's very, very difficult. So that part of it was quite difficult. And as I was going along, I was also pastoring a lot of people in that process too. And so when it was interesting when Bishop John McIntyre first came to Fish Creek Church, and probably like you, he said, "Oh, I didn't even know it existed." I don't know, you probably do, but he didn't know. But he came and he said, "Oh, this is a fresh expression of church."
Yeah,
and I'd taken on a role there in leadership, and thought, I just love this. I just love this place. And so that's when I started conversations with Bishop John about ordination as a way to express something that I so loved, which was ministering to people freely, with the love of God, and so I've continued to walk in that, and kept one afternoon a week for my medical work at this stage.
Yeah, no, it's fantastic. It's lovely that there's been that continuity too, and the two things so nicely integrated. It's almost like an enacted parable. Lord, what do you want me to do with this gift, this talent you've given me? How am I to express it? And you didn't bury it in the ground, Fran. You made it yield many fold. So that's fantastic, and it's a lovely story. Fran, you're an incredibly optimistic and hopeful person. And do you, after a year like this, where do you find yourself? In terms of your inner kind of outlook, and your sense of your own sense of well-being, I guess. Do you feel you probably feel a bit tired, as we all do, I think, at the end of this particular year, but do you feel hopeful and buoyant about the future of God's church?
I do, in what I've seen in the parish, in how it has actually bound us together a little bit more in the way we've cared for one another. And so while probably a large part of my time in the early years was how can we reach out to our community? How can we bring the message of Jesus to people? Where we haven't been able to do that in this time, we've really grown together as the people of God, and talking to people, how are you? Just being together on Zoom, albeit, but every time we have met, there's been a real joy in that too. And so I think there's been a real strengthening of the body of Christ as we've been able to do that, and I'm very thankful for that. I think there are challenges ahead into how we re-engage back with the community again, and do what we do. We've had to stop our community meal, which was a tremendous thing for reaching out to people of Caramburra. We've managed to keep in touch with young families with mainly music, so that's been hopeful. So I think it really is like at every turn, isn't it, for us to say, okay, Lord, what next? And as things opened up now, just before the busy time of year, Christmas, I think, oh, help us, give us strength, show us, what's important to do now, and to just walk that steady walk, and to trust and know that God's going to walk us there in those paths of peace.
And will give us the gifts that we need.
Yes, exactly. For whatever is.
And perhaps it has helped us to do that recalibration work, especially perhaps for our core people, that to not take for granted the privilege and the joy of meeting together. I think we've been reminded of that this year, haven't we? When it's been kind of taken away from us to some extent, to never assume that that's just something that's just there, that we can tap into at any time, but to really treasure that coming together as the body of Christ. And I'm sure, as you say, there'll be that renewed joy when we do, reconvene in larger and larger numbers, and can experience that sense of the gathered body as well as the kind of dispersed body.
Yes, and I think one of the things has been this idea of doing things differently. And well, you mentioned the Poowong Community Garden. That's definitely one of the things I've started doing during this time is walking the rail trail, but actually prayer-walking the rail trail. And at each town, where it be Fish Creek, Buffalo, Tura, Foster, at each place to pray and walk on the rail trail. And it's become a little bit of an idea with everybody's, maybe we'll do a pilgrimage, maybe we'll walk this walk and really pray that God will bless these places as we walk on the rail trail and invite people to walk with us. So, there's a different way of just meeting in a building, of actually walking together.
Absolutely. What a great idea. It's the old-fashioned thing of walking the beat, almost, walking the bounds of the parish,
Yeah.
and praying around the geography. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
The rail trail's beautiful. You see, as you drive through that lovely part of the world, all the bits where it stops and starts. And I've always thought, I'd love to take the kids and walk that, or get a bike and ride bits of that. And perhaps we can have a Southern Region pilgrimage or a diocesan pilgrimage through the rail trail. That'd be fantastic.
Be great, wouldn't it?
Yeah. Well, Fran, thank you so much for spending some time with us today and sharing all of that about yourself and your ministry context there, and also for sharing your really helpful reflections on that challenging gospel passage for us in the context of our worship. And thank you for your ministry as a priest and as a medical practitioner, and for making those two gifts come together so fruitfully for God's people and God's kingdom. So God bless you, and we'll look forward to catching up soon.
Thank you so much.
In person.
Real pleasure. Yeah, that's right. Real pleasure.
Thanks, Fran, and thanks everyone for watching. We'll see you next time.
Yeah,
bye for now.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.